200 of them, standing on the summit of a mountain in the darkness. And before they descend, they do something that tells you everything about what they understand they are about to do. They make an oath, not a plan, not a decision, an oath, a sworn covenant among themselves that if any one of them turns back, the others will curse him. They bind themselves to each other before they take a single step down that mountain, because they already know, without the oath, when the moment comes, fear will stop them. What they are about to do is that far outside the boundaries of everything that was ever supposed to exist. The mountain they are standing on is called Hermon. In Hebrew, the word Hermon comes from the root herem, which means ban, oath, a thing set apart under curse. The mountain did not have that name before this night. They gave it that name. They named it after what they swore on its summit. The mountain's own name is the permanent record of a conspiracy that changed the world before the flood and is still, right now as you watch this, locked underneath the earth, waiting for a judgment that has not yet arrived. This is not mythology. This is not ancient folklore that wandered into the margins of the Bible by accident. The Book of Jude, a canonical New Testament epistle, quotes this story directly, word for word, citing a source by name. The Apostle Peter describes their prison using a Greek word that appears nowhere else in the entire New Testament. Chosen deliberately, chosen carefully, because no other word in the language was specific enough to describe where they went. They are still there, and by the time this video is over, you are going to know exactly who they were, what they did, why God sent a flood that covered the entire earth specifically because of them, and why, unlike Satan, who still roams, these beings are chained in darkness and have been since the days of Noah. The answer to why they are still locked away will tell you something about spiritual warfare that almost nobody teaches. And it starts on that mountain, in the dark, with an oath 200 beings swore before they stepped off the edge of everything they were created to be. Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Most people read this verse and move on in 3 seconds. They have been told it means the godly descendants of Seth married the ungodly descendants of Cain. That is the explanation most churches offer. It sounds reasonable. It resolves the awkwardness quickly, and it is almost certainly wrong. Here is why. The Hebrew phrase translated sons of God is Bene Elohim, and that phrase does not appear many times in the Old Testament. It appears in Genesis 6. It appears in Job chapter 1 verse 6. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord. Same phrase. Angelic beings presenting themselves before God's throne. It appears again in Job 2:1. Same beings, same throne room. It appears in Job 38:7. When God is describing the creation of the world, he says the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. The angels, present at creation, celebrating what God was building. Every single time Bene Elohim appears in the Old Testament, every single time it refers to angelic beings, not human beings, not the descendants of a specific family line, angels. And this was not a debate in the ancient world. The Jews who read Genesis 6 closest to the time it was written, the scholars of the Second Temple period, roughly 500 BC to 70 AD, had no confusion about what the passage meant. Every major Jewish text from that period reads it the same way. The Watchers, angels who descended. This was the universal understanding. The alternative interpretation, the sons of Seth reading, was invented by Julius Africanus in the 3rd century AD, then picked up by Augustine in the 5th century. Not ancient, not original. A later theological revision, introduced partly because some church leaders were uncomfortable with the idea of angelic beings capable of physical reproduction with human women. The discomfort is understandable, but discomfort is not exegesis. And here's the detail that closes the case. Jude verse 6 and 7. And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. Read that carefully. Jude places the angels of Genesis 6 and the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah in parallel. He connects them using the phrase in a similar way. The sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was sexual immorality across a boundary that was not supposed to be crossed. Jude says the angels committed a sin similar to that, crossing a boundary, leaving their proper dwelling, abandoning the nature they were created with and reaching for something outside it. The sons of Seth interpretation cannot produce that parallel. Seth's descendants marrying Cain's descendants is not similar to the sin of Sodom. Angels abandoning their proper dwelling to pursue human women, that is exactly similar. The grammar requires it. Jude intended it. These were angels, and what they did on that mountain changed everything. The Book of Enoch. Before you dismiss it, hear what it actually is, because most Christians have been told to ignore it without being told why Jude quotes it directly. First Enoch is an ancient Jewish text, parts of which date to at least the 3rd century BC. It was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which means the community at Qumran considered it important enough to copy and preserve. It was quoted and referenced by multiple early church fathers: Justin Martyr, Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian, Irenaeus. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church considers it canonical to this day. And Jude, a canonical New Testament book written by the brother of Jesus, quotes it directly in verses 14 and 15. Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about them. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone. That quote is verbatim from 1 Enoch chapter 1 verse 9, not paraphrased, not a loose allusion, word for word. Jude is quoting 1 Enoch as scripture, so when 1 Enoch describes what happened on Mount Hermon, we are not reading mythology. We are reading a source that a New Testament writer trusted enough to cite by name in a canonical epistle. Here is what it says. 200 watchers descended on Mount Hermon in the days when Jared, Enoch's father, was alive. Their leader was named Semyaza, or Shemihaza. He gathered the others and proposed the descent. They were afraid, so they swore the oath. All 200 of them, bound to each other, before they went down. The Hebrew name for these beings, the Watchers, comes from the Aramaic ir, meaning one who watches, one who is awake, one who does not sleep. They were a specific order of angelic beings whose function was to observe and oversee. Guardian figures, set to watch over the earth and its inhabitants from above. And 200 of them decided that watching was not enough. They took human wives. They had children. And those children were the Nephilim. Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The word Nephilim. In Hebrew, it comes from the root nephal, to fall, the fallen ones. Or, in some readings, those who cause others to fall. A hybrid category of being. Not fully angelic because their fathers had abandoned angelic nature. Not fully human because their fathers had never been human. Something between. Something that did not belong in the created order as God had designed it. They were enormous. The text of Numbers 13:33, when the Israelite spies come back from Canaan, says, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." That is not poetry. That is a report from 12 men describing what they saw with their eyes. And the Nephilim did not disappear with the flood. Genesis 6:4 says, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward." After the flood, the line appears again. Og, king of Bashan. His bed is described in Deuteronomy 3:11 as 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. 9 cubits, 13.5 feet by standard measurement. His bed was 13 feet long. The text does not comment on this. It simply states it, because the original readers did not need the comment. Goliath of Gath, 6 cubits and a span, approximately 9 feet, 9 inches. 2 Samuel 21 says he had 4 brothers, also described as descendants of the Rephaim, a word connected to the Nephilim line. When David's mighty men killed those 4, it says the last of them fell, and the line of giants was finished in Gath. These were real people, with real measurements recorded in canonical scripture, descendants of what began on Mount Hermon. But the physical giants were not the most dangerous thing the Watchers introduced. This is the part almost nobody teaches, and it is the part that makes the flood make sense. 1 Enoch chapters 7 and 8 describe what the Watchers taught humanity after they descended, and the list should stop you cold. Azazel, one of the chief Watchers, taught men how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, how to work metals. He taught women the arts of beautification, ornaments, cosmetics, the use of dyes, specifically described in the text as tools of seduction and corruption. Semyaza taught enchantments and root cutting, sorcery. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakel taught astrology. Kokabel taught the knowledge of the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. Look at that list carefully. Metallurgy for weapons. Cosmetic arts used for seduction. Sorcery. Astrology. Occult systems for reading nature as a source of forbidden knowledge. Every category of what the ancient world would later call the dark arts. Traced here to a specific origin. Not human curiosity. Not natural development. Introduction by beings who were not supposed to be here. And 1 Enoch 9:6 says that because of this teaching, the earth has become filled with blood and unrighteousness. Not just because the Nephilim were violent, though they were, but because the knowledge introduced by the Watchers accelerated human capacity for destruction beyond anything the natural development of civilization would have produced. They gave weapons technology to a pre-flood world. They gave occult knowledge to people who had no framework to resist it. Genesis 6:5. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Every inclination, only evil, all the time. That is not the description of a civilization that gradually went off track. That is the description of a civilization that had been systemically corrupted from a source outside itself. The Watchers did not just sin, they infected. And God looked at what the earth had become and made a decision. The flood was not primarily a punishment for human sin. I know that is not the version you learned. Stay with me. Human sin was always present. Cain killed Abel in Genesis 4. Lamech boasted of murder in Genesis 4. The earth had darkness in it from the moment the garden closed. But God did not flood the earth for human sin. He had already given a promise, even after Cain, that human life would continue. The mark of Cain was protection, not execution. What changed in Genesis 6 was something categorically different. The contamination of the human line itself. The creation order. The separation of kinds that God established in Genesis 1, each according to its kind. The biological and spiritual boundaries between categories of being was being violated at the most fundamental level. Not by humans pushing against their nature. By beings from outside creation who were not supposed to be in the physical world at all, inserting themselves into the human genetic and spiritual line. 1 Enoch 10:9. God's instruction to the angel Raphael concerning the Watchers. Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. Make an opening in the desert, in Dudiel, and cast him there. Place upon him rough and jagged rocks. Cover him with darkness. Let him abide there forever. Do not allow his face to be seen until the day of judgment. Hand and foot, chained, bound, darkness. Rocks placed over him, covered, until the day of judgment. 2 Peter 2:4. God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to Tartarus, putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. Stop at the word Tartarus. Peter is writing to a Greek-reading audience. The Greek language has a word for the general realm of the dead, Hades. It has a word for the place of punishment within Hades, Gehenna. And it has one more word, the oldest and the deepest in the entire Greek cosmological tradition, Tartarus. In Homer's Iliad, Zeus himself warns the other gods that if they disobey him, he will throw them into Tartarus, as far below Hades as the earth is below the sky. In the Greek cosmological tradition, Tartarus was the prison of the Titans, primordial beings who had been defeated, bound, and placed in a pit so deep that a bronze anvil falling from the surface of the earth would take 9 days and 9 nights to reach the bottom. Peter does not use Hades. He does not use Gehenna. He uses Tartaru, a verb form of Tartarus, appearing once in the entire New Testament. Only here. He chose the most extreme, most final, most absolute word in the Greek vocabulary for imprisonment and used it to describe where these beings went. They went to the bottom. Jude 6 says they are held in darkness, bound with everlasting chains, for judgment on the great day. Not executed, not destroyed, bound, waiting. The judgment has not yet come. The chains are holding them until the day it does. They are still there right now. Here's the question almost nobody asks. If the Watchers are chained in Tartarus, where do demons come from? They are not the same beings. 1 Enoch 15, and this is where the theology becomes genuinely extraordinary. God speaks to Enoch about the Nephilim, the giant children of the Watchers, after the flood has killed their physical bodies. And he says this, "The spirits of the giants shall be like clouds, and shall afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth, and cause trouble. They shall take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst, and cause offenses. And these spirits shall rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them. The Nephilim were hybrids, half angelic, half human. When their physical bodies died in the flood, their spirits had nowhere to go. They were not human enough to go where human souls go. They were not angelic enough to return to the heavenly realm they had no part in. They were a category of being that creation had no designed place for. And so they wander, bodiless, seeking, driving people toward the same corruption that defined their brief physical existence. This is what the New Testament calls demons, not fallen angels. The fallen angels are the Watchers, and the Watchers are chained. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, hybrid beings with no place in the order of creation, still operational, still seeking, still causing the exact categories of destruction described in 1 Enoch: afflicting, oppressing, attacking, working destruction. This is why Jesus, when he casts demons out, they beg him not to send them to the abyss. Luke 8:31. They know the abyss exists. They know what is imprisoned there. They are asking not to join the Watchers in the chains. They would rather wander in a herd of pigs than be bound in the darkness where their fathers are. That is not a random detail. That is a being with a specific, terrified knowledge of a specific, real place. This is the question underneath everything else. And the answer is more specific than most people think. Satan, the accuser, Satan, sinned through pride. Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, the rebellion that predates human history. His sin was internal, cosmic ambition. He wanted to be worshipped. He wanted the throne. He operated within, or rather against, the spiritual order of creation, but he did not tear through the boundary between spiritual and physical reality. He did not cross the species line. He did not corrupt the biological creation. His sin was against God's authority. The Watcher's sin was against God's design. There is a legal distinction in Scripture between these two categories, and the sentences are different because the crimes are different. Satan still operates in what 1 Peter 5:8 calls walking about, roaming, active, functional. He has a role within the cosmic court of Job 1, still permitted to appear, still permitted to accuse, operating under limits God has set. His case is still, in some sense, open. He is a prosecutor awaiting final judgment but still present in the courtroom. The Watchers get no courtroom, no permitted presence, no continued function. They crossed a line that is described in every passage that mentions them in the exact same terms, abandoned their proper dwelling, left their first estate, crossed the boundary they were not designed to cross. And the sentence for that specific sin is immediate, total, and permanent until the final judgment. Chained, in darkness, at the bottom. There is one more detail, and it is the detail that connects this story directly to you. The Watchers descended on Mount Hermon. In Deuteronomy 3:8-9, when Moses is describing the territory Israel has just taken from Og, king of Bashan, the giant king with the 13-foot bed, he names the border Mount Hermon, the territory of the Rephaim, the descendants of the post-flood Nephilim line. Israel taking that land was not just a military campaign. It was a systematic reclamation of the specific geography where the original corruption had taken root. And then something happens in the New Testament that most people have never connected to any of this. Matthew 16:13. Jesus and his disciples are in Caesarea Philippi, at the foot of Mount Hermon, at the base of the exact mountain where the Watchers swore their oath. There is a cave there, still visible today, that the ancient world called the Gates of Hades, a place where the ground opens and descends into darkness and the water flows up from underground. The Greeks and Romans built a temple to Pan at its mouth. It was considered a literal entrance to the underworld. Every ancient tradition around this site said the same thing. This is where the barrier between the world of the living and the world of the dead is thinnest. Jesus brings his disciples to this exact place, to the gates of Hades, to the foot of the mountain named after the oath of the Watchers, and he asks them, "Who do you say I am?" Peter says, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus responds, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." Standing at the gates of Hades, at the foot of Hermon, at the geographic center of the Watcher conspiracy, Jesus declares that what is being built here, his church, his people, will not be defeated by whatever is below that ground. The Watchers swore an oath on that mountain before they descended into corruption. Jesus made a declaration on that mountain before he ascended to the cross. 2 oaths, 2 mountains, one that led into chains and darkness. one that opened an empty tomb. The Watchers are still locked away. Their spirits still wander. The corruption they introduced is still visible in the world. None of that has been fully resolved yet. But the declaration made at the foot of their mountain has not failed once in 2,000 years. That is not ancient history. That is the structure of the war you are in right now. And now you know whose chains those are, and whose declaration that is, and why the gates of what imprisoned them cannot overcome what was built in their shadow. If this opened something in the text you had never seen before, share it. This story has been sitting in Jude, in Peter, in Genesis for thousands of years, waiting to be read carefully. Subscribe and stay close, because what Enoch saw in the vision that Jude quotes, the Lord coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones, that part has not happened yet either.